Hello and welcome to Introducing Modern Action Bar session. My name is Ivan Koletic and I'm a product manager in Business Central team, bringing you this session together with my colleague Peter Boring. Our agenda for today is as follows. We'll start a bit with an explanation of why we decided to invest in Modern Action Bar, what was the feedback driving it, goals and principles. And after that, I'll be delivering the Modern Action Bar user experience to you. And Peter will talk about the developer experience behind that user experience, the things that actually enable that user experience. So let's start off with a quote. What you can see are multiple issues mentioned in one of the representative comments that we get daily from our users. What you immediately see is that the quote talks about inefficiencies, ambiguous terminology in action bar, the structure of the action bar. The other feedback that doesn't fit this screen that we get talks about confusion with action bar, duplications, and so on and so on. So it's obvious that the action bar, that the legacy action bar has a problem. And in summary, what Business Central needs to do to help its users is to provide better discoverability of actions, bring more efficiency in the way that the actions are reached through the action bar, reduce the need to use the action bar repository, reduce the redundancy and duplication, and lift some of the constraints that legacy action bar had on personalization, and top it all up with improved consistency and action organization across the most used pages. These were actually our goals when we endeavored in this project, and we also said we also need to do that in a way that it actually creates the minimum disruption for our end users and enables easy uptake for our partners. What you see on this slide is that on one side we have a proficient user, and on the other we have a novice user, and they usually have very conflicting requirements. The proficient users actually seek efficiency, whereas the novice users look for consistency and easy way to learn how to use Business Central. Our job was, of course, to balance those opposing needs in a way that we, on one hand, follow the rules as a starting point, the rules that will guarantee some consistency, but also allow for special cases to be optimized and informed by the telemetry that we collected on the action bar usage. In other words, we wanted to balance the needs of the novice and the proficient users while providing the tools for our consultants and professional developers to optimize the action bar. And with that, to address those needs, we are actually introducing this Modern Action Bar. So what it is? The action bar consists of promoted categories, actions, and the action repository. Promoted categories can contain promoted actions and promoted subcategories at any level. The goal of the whole promoted area of the action bar is to contain categories and actions that have highest prominence. By prominence, we mean actions that are most important and most frequently used. Action repository, on the other hand, this right-hand side of the action bar, or as our users like to call them, the hidden actions, contains all actions and action groups available on a specific page. Below, to compare, is a legacy action bar. Difference you might immediately notice without going into extensive details is a cleaner list of promoted categories, a more prominent promoted actions immediately available for the end user. So Peter, how can developers build modern action bar experiences?
Yes, Ivan, but first welcome from me as well. So before we dig into the new action model, let's start by looking at the developer experience until now. In that model, promoted actions are implicitly created through properties on the action. So we have a promoted action categories that specifies the caption of the 20 predefined promoted groups that are available. You then set promoted on the action to indicate that this action needs to be promoted. You specify the category that the action should belong to, the promoted category that the action should belong to. You can choose to have the promoted action be big and be moved towards the start of the group. And you can also control that the action is only showed as promoted via the promoted only property. But this model have had some issues with working with promoted actions. For example, for developers, there hasn't been a way to control the exact ordering of promoted actions. There also hasn't been possible to create new categories. Basically, you only had up to 20 categories and you could change the caption of those, but it wasn't really a free model. And likewise, because of this fixed set of categories, there hasn't been a way to create hierarchies of groups for the categories for the promoted actions. Likewise, for the personalization story and the designer experience, it hasn't been possible to move the categories around, or for that matter, change the order of actions within each category. So, for that reason, and to solve these issues, we spent quite a lot of investment in creating a new model for promoted actions, for the promoted side of the action bar. And this new model relies on two new concepts. First of all, we are introducing a new area named promoted, which corresponds to the promoted area of the action bar that you saw earlier in this presentation. And the promoted area can contain a number of groups, and these groups can be nested, and they are now explicit in AL. So you actually have keywords or define an area promoted and then have groups within. Then we have another new concept, which is an indirection or a reference to an action, and we call this action ref. And that is a way to have or point to an action and include it multiple other places in multiple other groups for that matter. Normally you would only do it from one place, and that would be then the promoted way of representing that action. And the action refs can only be defined in the promoted area. They can either be directly in the promoted area or within one of the groups in the promoted area. The action ref do not really have a lot of properties. You can control the visibility of action refs, but apart from that, it inherits all of its properties from the action that it refers to. So that kind of ensure that there's a consistency. The only thing that the action ref is really used for is to represent the action in the promoted area. So there's actually then two ways now, because we still will support the old ways of using promoted action properties, but you cannot mix these for the same object. So for the same page, you cannot mix the two different approaches. If you do, you will get a compiler error saying that you, of course, cannot do that. However, you are allowed to mix these two models within the same application. And that is to support you to gradually migrate your existing pages to the new model, right? So you don't have to uptake this for your whole app, but you can take it gradually. But how does this side-by-side support then actually work? Well, the runtime actually only knows about the new model, the new promoted area and the action ref model. So what happens is that if there's still applications installed that uses the old model, using promoted properties on the action itself, runtime will on the fly convert, or actually, no, at install time, it will convert these to the new model and use that at runtime. And that conversion uses some naming conventions. The created promoted actions will be moved to basically an action ref, which consists of the action name and underscore promoted. And the promoted categories will be moved to groups, which will be named category underscore and then the old category name. And you should follow these naming guidelines as well, because that then ensures that you can actually refer to the converted model at runtime in a good side-by-side manner. So because of this conversion at runtime, as I said, we support any of the combinations between the old model and the new model when you work with extensions of pages. And that means that they can coexist, and this makes life a lot easier for you as part of uptaking. So, of course, you can do as what you have done today. You can have the classic way of doing this. We call that the V1, or promoted action properties. You can have that on the page, and when you build a page extension on top of that page, that can still use the old way of doing things, and that is still supported. You can, of course, also completely uptake this. Maybe you're building a new application, and when you're creating new pages with new actions, you use the new way of having explicit promoted area and groups and action refs, and anyone extending that page also uses the new model and to modify some of these action refs, for example. But then the interesting combinations is that because we have the runtime, you can actually mix. So if somebody created a V2 page with the explicit promoted area and action ref, you can still build a page extension for that using the old model. And we will still, on the platform side, convert that and make sure that that works. Of course, you might not have the same capabilities when you are using the old model, but it will work. And likewise, even if the originating owner of the page that you extend have not converted to the new model, you can actually build page extensions on top of that in the new model. And again, that will work completely seamlessly. So all of these combinations ensure that new action refs and promoted area can be uptaken gradually to minimize the impact on all of you with the existing applications. To make life even easier, we also created a code action to convert all of your old models to the new model. And so that's something that you can invoke like a usual code action. But we actually, because there's so many places in code where you likely are using promoted actions with the old model, we have built support for select code actions to actually be run in larger scopes as well. So normally you can only run them in an instance scope where you actually see the diagnostic issue, but now you can also run them for all of the places in the document or the file, in all of the project, the active project where you invoke the code action, or for the complete solution, which would be a workspace. And since this change is normally very mechanical, it means that you can actually very, very quickly, just by running the code action, convert all of your existing uses of promoting action via the promoted properties to the new model with the explicit promoted area and action refs. So this should make life very easy for you to convert your apps. Just to see what actually happens in the conversion, both at runtime and as part of the code action, we see here an example of using the old model with the promoted categories defined via some captions, and then having some actions with the promoted properties set. On the conversion, these will be converted to promoted area and groups and action refs. So, of course, the promoted action categories will be converted to groups within the promoted area. And notice the naming convention here, where we have the category underscore and then the old name of the promoted action categories. Also note that we are adding captions here for how to show this UI-wise. And you can, of course, in the case where you have converted this in code yourself explicitly, you can, of course, go in and modify that if you would like for the captions. And then we see also how the actions that were promoted are created as action refs in the corresponding category that they should belong to. So that's how the conversion works. And then this new model will be the one represented in the promoted area of the action bar. So, of course, like with other constructs, we also need to think about the requirements for AppSource apps. And so here we added new AppSource validation rules to make sure that there are affixes for the action refs and promoted groups to ensure some name uniqueness for your AppSource solutions. And we are also going to validate for breaking changes in these concepts so that you cannot just remove an action ref without it being obsoleted or remove promoted groups without them being obsoleted, because anyone building on top of your app source apps might have extended those and have anchors that points to those, right? So just like with all objects, there's an obsolescence story and a validation for breaking changes. That's it for the developer experience for building the modern action bar. So back to you, Ivan, for how this actually helps users.
So thank you, Peter. Let's talk a bit about how Modern Action Bar helps you be more efficient in day-to-day tasks and helps you easily discover important actions. Modern Action Bar now contains Home Action Group as a place to look for the most important actions for a task. Home Group is a familiar concept from other Microsoft products that users easily discover. It is effectively just a rename of our process group, not a net new group. Home Group is automatically pinned across pages, making all actions in Home Group available with a single click. More prominent action groups are now subordinated to the Home Group, as you can see in here, the release and posting on the sales order. And these things just make users more efficient. Where possible, where action groups contains actions with similar meaning or variations to the theme, action groups are now converted to split buttons. You might wonder, what are actually split buttons? So the split button is a new concept in Business Central, but not so new in other Microsoft products. Users are used to it from experiences with other products, they recognize it and use it easily with a lower interaction cost. It further improves efficiency, removes the burden from the developer to invent names of action groups, and has a fallback to action group if the client where the action is rendered does not support it. Let's switch back to Peter to see how developers can light these capabilities up.
Okay, so let's have a look at how split buttons are created in AL. Here's some page code and the resulting action bar. And the way you create a split button is simply by adding the show as property and set it to split button. And that is going to indicate on a group, so this property is on a group. And that indicates that this group is going to be rendered as a split button. And then the first action that you define in this group will be the action which is basically becoming the button action. So a split button works in two ways. It's a normal button that you can press, but you also have a way to drop down or look up and see with the arrow on the left and see additional options within that split button. But the first action in your group is defining the action that will happen if you just press the button. Now, if you then expand the split button, you will see all of the other actions that are part of this group. And here, because this is an explicit model, again, you can define the order of this and influence the split button experience. So we also made another change, and that is around the way that you handle the repeater actions or the scope repeaters. And these are actions that are available in the action bar, but also directly on the row that you have selected in your list page, shown here in the image. And this is a small snippet of code that you would normally write to create these repeater actions. But what is wrong with this code? Well, it can be hard to see, but actually up until now you have had to remember to promote any of the actions that had to go into the repeaters, right? And that was basically maybe a little known rule. It has been documented, but the problem has been that if you forget to include it, then the compiler would not inform about this, and you would just not see this action in the repeater. And so we are changing the behavior slightly now. We are actually from version 20 and earlier, we have now added a UI cop rule which depends on the runtime version in apt.json, so it's just for those earlier versions. And that will inform you that you forgot to include the promoted true on the action. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to put this into the repeater actions. But going forward from version 21, we no longer require you to promote these actions, right? So now you can include the actions in the repeater just by setting scope equal to repeater, but without actually promoting the action. So back to you, Ivan, for how we can help reduce redundancy in the action bar.
Thank you, Peter. Duplication and redundancy are frequently mentioned in users' feedback. So let's explore how Modern Action Bar deals with this. Ambiguity of action groups that contain related information to the current entity is reduced by merging navigate and so-called entity action groups. The more abstract term navigate is replaced with a more specific. In an example on the screen, the navigate is merged with a group that is called order, which is easily recognizable for the users. And users now have a single place to look for the related information in promoted area of the action bar instead of two in the legacy action bar. One of the ways we reduce redundancy in Modern Action Bar is by redefining how promoted actions appear in actions repository. Duplication of actions in promoted area and actions repository is a sort of lot of confusions, especially on the pages that have had very few actions where this duplication is even more obvious. With Modern Action Bar, once you promote action, it is no longer visible in the actions repository. Same applies for action groups in which all actions are promoted. They disappear from actions repository, making it easier to browse through if needed. However, to reduce disruption to the end user habits, Modern Action Bar shows new other menu with already promoted actions, thus reducing the clutter in the action repository. If end users still want to see the actions in the old representation, they can click the new Use Short menu option. There are obviously some changes under the hood that help with reducing redundancy and duplication of actions. Peter, what are the changes for developers in this area?
Well, even promoted only property is actually not really used for anything anymore. So let's look at an example. So here I have some code representing a group, and we have some actions in the group, and some of them are promoted, and one of them is not. So in 2022 Release Wave 2, we basically treat all promoted actions as implicitly promoted only. So the way this is done is that when we render the action bar for the code example here, we create, of course, a group corresponding to the code. So we have a posting group here. And then we have one of the actions which is not promoted. And that's actually showing up in the group in the actions repository part of the action bar as we see here. But we also see that we have two actions that are promoted. And they're not immediately showing up in the action repository on the right side of the action bar. Instead, they are shown under other submenu to make that whole menu experience cleaner. And we see here then that the promoted actions are hidden under there. Now, if you would like to, you can actually switch back to show them in the action repository as well without being buried under the other submenu. You have the option here to click the Use Short menu, or deselect that, and that will move all of the promoted actions out of the other submenu and remove the other submenu. And this choice is something which is say, per group and per page. So you actually have quite a good flexibility on choosing whether you want these otherwise promoted actions to actually be shown in the action repository or not. So that's another thing with these promoted only setting, that if you have a group which only contains promoted actions, then the group itself is no longer rendered, right? Because there's nothing really to show there. Everything has been promoted. Normally, you would have, or we would have seen a group rendered. In this case, in the code example here, we have a release and a reopen group, and it would normally be shown under the actions repository on the right side of the actions bar. but it's not because everything is promoted. And the way that you can then surface this again could be to, in personalization, reapply those. And so, speaking of personalization, Ivan, can you show how the modern action bar can be personalized?
Thanks, Peter. Our proficient and power users love personalizing Business Central, so it fits their specific process, company, or industry needs. Let's see what's new in this area. And we're off for a short demo. Okay, let's try the new personalization experience with the modern action bar. So I'll go to the cogs wheel and I click personalize. First thing that we couldn't do in the legacy action bar was simply shuffling around the promoted categories. As you can see, this is now possible. If we focus on the actions part of the promoted category, you see that you can actually shift around actions. One of the other things that you couldn't do in the legacy action bar was actually moving the action to the root level. If it's so important and you want the action bar to be in the unpinned state in here, you can actually move some of the actions to the top level. What you notice in here are also these new split buttons. And if you're not satisfied with the default action, you can always change it by just moving it to the first place, and then the action that is on top of the split button becomes the action that you personalized. Of course, split buttons, you can also move split buttons to the root level. Instead of demo summary, let me take you through a comparison of personalization capabilities in legacy and modern action bar. In the area of promoted categories, as you saw, you were limited to 20 predefined categories. Right now, you can actually add as much as you want. In the legacy action bar, you weren't able to reorder promoted categories. Modern action bar enables you to do so. Defining promoted subcategories was also not possible. And customizing promoted categories, you could have only customized the caption in the legacy action bar, whereas with the modern action bar, you can do much more. When we talk about actions, one of the most frequently asked things in terms of personalization of action bar was reordering of the promoted actions. In legacy action bar, you could have just decided whether you wanted to go towards the start or the end of the specific category. With modern action bar, you actually have the full flexibility. And of course, defining a top-level promoted actions was not possible in the legacy action bar, whereas the modern action bar also brings you that capability. In order to allow seamless uptake of modern action bar, most of the in-client customizations that already exist are just converted on the fly. Depending on the type of the customization, we have a few variations of conversion experience. For example, user personalizations are converted without requiring any any manual intervention from the user. They will just happen during upgrade. Profile customizations are also automatically converted during upgrade. Conversion also happens during import of profiles. On top of this, there's a new partner telemetry signal for traceability on these operations. For designer extensions, since those are often tracked under source control, the conversion needs some manual work. That part I'll leave for Peter to explain later. Let's say that I have a legacy profile from my current version, and I want to take that profile and apply it for a new customer after October 2022. What I can do is simply import the profile, and then the wizard will take me through a couple of steps where I select the profile that I want to import. It will actually read the profile, and we will say, let's go ahead and complete the import. After the import, I will be notified with a sort of a diagnostic message that not only that we've imported the profile, we've also converted it to the new model. So Peter, what happens under the hood here?
Well, Ivan, the simplest way to see the result of a profile conversion is actually to export the profile once it's been converted. So going into the profiles view, you have the option here to export profile. So let's try that. Well, once we downloaded the profile, we can open the profile and we can inspect the different configurations. And what we see is that the old structure of the the use of the promoted categories have been converted to using a modifier operation, adding an action ref instead. And that's basically how we also saw earlier the conversion going from the old model to the new model, right? So it used to be a modify setting promoted properties, but now it's basically a modification adding an action ref instead. So that's what happened in the profile. So there's another scenario as well, and that is when you are using the designer from within Visual Studio Code and running round trips with that. So let's say that you are opening some page code in the designer which contains the use of the old promoted properties. Now, when you then launch the designer from VS Code, it's actually going to detect that you're using the old model. You will see that there's a lock, so the experience is locked for modification. And there's also going to be an indication that this is using the old model. And what you can then do is that you can unlock the experience. And as part of that unlock, the page will actually be converted behind the scenes so that when you pull it back into VS Code, you're actually going to see the new model, right? So this is a way to ensure in that round trip, if you're already touching code that hasn't been converted, this will help you convert that code as part of doing other modifications in the designer and putting that back into VS Code. However, if you want to convert large quantities of old uses of the promoted properties, you should really use the code action instead that I showed earlier and apply that either just on a single instance, on the file, or probably normally either the whole project for the extension or a whole workspace. So even now that we have seen how to convert profiles and use the designer round trips, can you talk about ensuring consistency in the user experience for actions?
Consistent placement of actions builds trust with Business Central. It helps new users learn Business Central faster, and it helps proficient users utilize muscle memory when going outside of their usual paths. Making action bar consistent across many pages that represent business functionality in Business Central is a big problem, as Business Central contains thousands of pages with promoted areas. We focused on promoted actions of top 180 pages that account for 95+% of usage in Business Central across 24 localizations that Microsoft delivers. Our goal was to make sure promoted categories are consistently placed in pages. For example, document pages that participate in sales processes now have consistent placement of promoted categories. Similarly, we wanted to ensure consistency not only within the process, but also across the processes. So you'll see consistent placement of promoted categories, even between sales and purchase documents, for example. At the same time, promotion of actions within those categories was informed by usage insights for over 280 million data points that we collected from telemetry over the course of 1 year. Result of this is a number of prominent actions that were hidden behind 4 to 6 clicks in Action Repository are now promoted and consistently placed in Modern Action Bar. Let me give you a few examples. For example, the Create Warehouse Shipment action is now in Sales Orders Home category, which is available immediately. Previously, it was 4 levels deep in Actions Repository. Renumber Document Numbers action is now in Payment Journal Home category, also available for the users. With a single click, previously it was dug in 4 levels deep in Actions Repository. And a third example is Dimensions Multiple Action, which I know a lot of you use, is now in the Entity category on the item card available in 2 clicks, whereas it was hidden behind 5 levels in the Action Repository. Let me give you a few more examples. Let's look at sales and purchase orders with Legacy and Modern Action Bar. You can immediately see consistency issues in promoted categories in Legacy Action Bar compared to the Modern Action Bar. You can also notice inconsistencies in process group in the Legacy Action Bar And you can see that the actions in the modern action bar are way more consistent. If you remember, one of our goals for the modern action bar was to make sure it brings minimum to no user disruption. So let me explain how we managed to do that. Modern action bar is an optional capability for all of our existing or upgrading customers. You as an end user can try it out on your own temporarily within your session and decide if it brings value to you or not. If it does, make sure to chase down your administrator to enable this for all users. One of our goals was to make new experience as non-disruptive as possible, so we hope not a lot of training will be required for the existing or new users to update this. Speaking of new users and customers, they get Modern Action Bar enabled by default if they start on the Release Wave 2 2022 version of Business Central. So what are the changes that are actually hidden behind this feature key? Well, first thing is that the process action categories now, when you turn on the Modern Action Bar features, will be renamed to Home. The second thing that you will see is that some of the action groups are now subordinated to Home because they are very prominent, they are very frequently used, and some of them are also converted to split buttons. Action bar is now presented in the pin state. And one other thing is that the more options action on the lines subpage action bar is automatically expanded, so it saves you one click every single time you use it. So it's time to sum things up. So what you've seen Peter present was a new promoted action meta model that is backwards compatible. You've seen that you can now use actions in the context menu without promoting them. You've seen how much more efficient the Modern Action Bar is in terms of showing the most important actions in the group and utilizing split buttons. You saw Modern Action Bar using auto pinning as a default. You've seen how reduced ambiguity will actually help users learn things faster and be less confused about the overall action bar experience. I've shown you some of the personalization capabilities that we've added to the action bar together with the reduced redundancy in the action repository. We've also talked a bit about automated conversion of existing personalizations and customizations that were done through in-client designer. And Peter talked about the code actions that will help all of you developers out there convert your apps and extensions with close to a single click. And to top it all up, you've also seen how the Modern Action Bar experience provides you this more consistent experience across many pages that are most frequently used. And we made sure that all of that is done through a controlled, in a controlled manner without big user disruption. In terms of go-dos or actions for you, I certainly recommend that you go out and read about Modern Action Bar in our release plans. If you are a developer, start converting your apps and extensions to the new promoted actions, to utilize the new promoted actions meta model. In this session, you saw how easy it is. If you have apps out there that are using hidden action groups that contain promoted actions, there's an action to be taken so that users keep seeing those actions. And for the developers out there, we have a sort of a detailed BC Tech Days recording done by our engineers on this topic as well. So we definitely recommend you go ahead and have a look at that as well. For the end users, again, browse through the documentation on Modern Action Bar and try the Modern Action Bar. Right now, it's safe to try it. You can always turn it off. You can also already enable it in your sandbox environments today, or once it gets once your environments get upgraded, try it out in there. And by no means, if you have some feedback on Modern Action Bars, go to BC Ideas and let us know what you think about it. The next slide contains some other general resources we have for all participants. And with that, I want to thank you for your time in my and Peter's name for listening to us talk about the Modern Action Bar experience. Thank you.